Well, welcome everyone. It's good to see you all here and welcome to our Solar4Strata webinar. We're excited to have you all here and to get moving with our agenda for tonight. Next slide. So before we actually start, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping points. First of all, we are recording this webinar, but your names won't appear on the recording. But if you do want to be seen, if you don't want to be seen, pardon me, on the video, on the recording, just switch your video off. But you know, we do love to see your faces, so please keep your video on if you can. No need for notes. Everyone who is registered for the event will get a follow-up email with a summary and a link. Now, just a word about the mute. We're all muted to avoid interfering with the sound of the speakers. Just in regard to views, you can choose gallery view to see everyone at the webinar, or you can choose speaker view to get a close-up of the speaker. Chat. The chat window can be opened near the speech bubble, just down there on the bottom ribbon, at the bottom of the screen, and our team will be monitoring the chat, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. Let us know your name and what suburb you're from. You can click on the 3 dots on your face to rename yourself with a first name and a suburb. And that makes it just a bit easier for us to know who's here. Question and answers. Type your questions into the chat. That's how we're going to do it. And our team will be monitoring the chat, and they're going to put questions to the speaker at the end of each presentation. If you've got any technical problems, tell us in the chat and our tech team will try to help you out. All right, next slide. No, sorry, actually, we might just go back there for a minute. And just before we do start with our agenda, I would like to actually do an acknowledgement to country. I'd like to begin actually by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we broadcast, the Bidjigal and Gadjigal peoples of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past, present and future, as well as all elders on the lands in which this broadcast is being watched. This is and will always be Aboriginal land. Okay, so we might move on then, Richard, to the agenda. So what have we got on tonight? We have a pretty full agenda. First of all, we're going to start with a talk from Kristy Walters, who's going to be talking about renewables revolution. Then we're going to move on to Dr. Mike Roberts and Steve Nelson, and they're going to be looking at what are your options. There are many different ways in which we can approach this issue. Third, we've got how your local council can help, a very practical session with Sam Kelley from Randwick Council. And then a question and answer with Louise Newry. And finally, what's next with Steve Nelson. So now before we actually get into the agenda, we'll move on and have a quick look at polls. So we have got a poll for you. It's going to be coming up on your screen, and we'd like you to do it, and then we're going to quickly share the results before we actually start with Kristy's talk. Oh, okay. So I think we're getting close to the end of polling. Is that right, Erin? Yep. And yeah, getting close. And so we'll get those results soon. Thank you all for doing it. Okay, so now we're looking at the poll results, and it looks like a lot of you have, if I'm right, haven't heard maybe about or have heard about solar farms, but maybe aren't so clear about some of the other options. So anyway, thank you very much for doing that. And let's move on then to our first speaker, Kristy Walters. Next slide. Yes. Okay. Kristy Walters. Kristy, we welcome you to this session. Thanks very much for agreeing to speak with us. Kristy is a facilitator, educator, and environmental campaigner. She holds a degree in environmental management in a sustainable development focus and has experience working in social enterprises, cooperatives, and the private sector. So over to you, Kristy.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. So I did have a couple of slides, but anyway, that's all right. You can just look at my face. So I'm from Community Power Agency. We are a non-profit focused on driving a faster and fairer transition to a clean energy future. And we do that by supporting communities and groups all around the country to start their own energy projects. So I was asked to come along today to talk about renewables in general. So I guess one of the first things that I will say is that, as I'm sure everyone is aware, the transition to renewables is it's inevitable. And there's many reasons for that. Firstly, it's the cost is massively coming down. Renewables are now the cheapest new build technology for power, especially in Australia. We have an aging energy infrastructure system in Australia. Our coal-fired power stations are reaching the end of their life. In fact, a couple of years ago, Tim Nelson, who was at AGL, said that 75% of Australia's existing coal-fired power stations have passed their useful life, and 20% is more than 40 years old. So they're all reaching the end of their life, and we're coming to the phase where we need to be transitioning all of our big power producers. The next reason why the transition is inevitable is because Australia has the best renewables in the world. So it just makes sense, both economically and environmentally, for us to take advantage of that. And the other thing that we have on our side is that Australians really love renewables. We have one of the highest uptakes of rooftop solar in the world. And there's, I think at last count, it was 2.2 million solar homes in Australia. So a lot of people are doing their own bit, whether or not our governments are doing theirs. Although last week we had some great announcements from New South Wales governments, and also there's been a lot of uptake in the corporate sector with Bunnings and Woolworths going to 100% renewable in the coming short years. So that's very exciting. The other thing I want to talk to you about is how everybody can participate in this transition. So we've already talked about solar on your roof. One of the things that we do is help communities start energy groups and their own projects, whether that's a solar bulk buy or starting a cooperative solar farm. Some of you might be familiar with Pingala in Sydney, who've put solar on the rooftop of Young Henry's and Pingala's breweries. And they've done that through a community investment model so that lots of people can participate in financially making it happen. So that's really exciting. There's lots of examples of councils and businesses co-partnering with communities to make projects happen. So that's exciting. And really the thing that I guess drives me in working in this renewable sector and in community energy in particular is that we like to call them the 4Ds of community energy. So the first one obviously is that it's decarbonising our energy sector using renewable energy and low carbon technologies. The second one is decentralizing and localizing our energy supply. And that's really important, especially as we would have all seen over the last summer, where there was lots of bushfires and storms that were affecting transmission and distribution lines. If we have more energy systems that are distributed, that's less likely to affect like a lot of people at once. So that's another reason for community energy and you know, people getting on doing projects where they are and where they can. The third one is doing community energy really democratizes our energy system through community ownership and participation. And that's really important for people to be involved and to increase their energy literacy, so they understand what changes are happening and can participate, whether that's in an engagement process or in owning part of the asset, or there's lots of different ways to participate in those systems. And the fourth one that is really important is demonstration. And so we need to see projects that work in all parts of our country, so that everyone can get on board with the larger coming transition that needs to take place. And so that's where community energy really has a kind of a sweet spot. So there's lots of large scale renewable energy, the 100 megawatt and plus projects, and there's lots of small scale. So, you know, the 3 kilowatt system on your rooftop might be a 10 kilowatt system on a business, you know, small scale stuff like that. And there's this kind of missing piece in the middle, which is the sort of 100 kilowatt to 100 megawatt size. And that's where community energy can really come into its own. It's a really manageable size for people to be involved in. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to be working in that area. And these projects can be a real diversity in terms of energy, whether it's electricity, fuel or heat. And obviously the technology, it can come from wind, solar, bioenergy, hydro. And the motivations for people doing these projects are really diverse. So in lots of areas, it's obviously the environmental to act on climate change. There's regional development. So in lots of areas, they're using this as a way to save money that they can then funnel into other projects that supports the community. There's also a lot of self-sufficiency. In some cases, putting in a new power line to a farm or a house that's being set up is actually much more costly than just setting up your own self-sufficient solar and battery system. And lots of people just want to have control of their energy supply. So local empowerment, and obviously all of these things are contributing to the local economy. In fact, when projects are community owned, they deliver much more benefits to the local economy through local contractors being used. People are more likely to use the services in the town for catering and accommodation. There's all the ancillary things that can get added on to these sorts of projects. And the other unique thing about community energy is the ownership structure can be a whole range of different things. So there can be companies, associations, cooperatives, they can be for profit, profit for purpose, not for profit. So there's a whole range of things in there, and lots of different ways for people to be involved in. Indeed, we're seeing kind of every kind of iteration of how these projects can happen already coming online. About 10 years ago, there was less than 30 groups, and now there's more than 110 across the country. And we know of plenty more groups that are wanting to start these sorts of projects, just needing more support to get going. And the final thing that I wanted to chat quickly about before I hand over to the rest of the team is a new model of community energy that's just coming into Australia, and it's called a solar garden. I understand Mike's going to chat a little bit more about that down the line, but it's a project that I'm really excited about. Community Power Agency is pioneering this with Pingala and Coma Energy on a project called Haystack Solar Garden. And it's really a solution for those that are locked out of accessing rooftop solar. It's a way for you to own solar that isn't on your rooftop. So happy to talk more about that later on, but essentially the benefits of that is that it's like portable, it's hassle-free, it's an Australian first, and it's open to everybody in New South Wales. So I might just finish up there, because I know we've got lots of things to chat about, but I'll be around for questions if anyone's wanted to ask any other things.
Well, we might just all say thank you very much to you, Kristy. Thanks for an energising talk and a look at the community power sector. And you're starting to alert ahead to all these choices that we have, and we're going to move into that in our next segment. But before we do that, what I'd like to do is to ask people to smile for a photo. Smile and wave. Now, I can see we've got people from Chatswood, Wallara, all sorts of places. So let's see if we can get a good photo. Smile and wave now, and we'll get Erin to take a shot. Yep. Are we right? We done, Richard? Yes? Okay, done. So with that out of the way then, I'd like to actually introduce our next speakers for the main part of tonight's event. And they are Dr. Mike Roberts. Dr. Mike Roberts is a research associate at the School for Photovoltaic and Renewable Energy Engineering at UNSW. He's also a solar analyst at the Australian PV Institute. His research includes technical and economic data analysis and policy approaches for distributed renewables and the energy transition. Mike's doctoral thesis explored opportunities and barriers for the deployment of distributed PV on strata buildings, of great relevance to tonight. And secondly, we have Steve Nelson. As an investor, Steve Nelson focuses on companies benefiting from technology disruption. He's excited by the possibilities new renewables industries such as solar and electric vehicles present for jobs and long-term economic growth. He believes we are underestimating just how rapidly this disruption is occurring. So I'm going to hand over then to Steve Nelson to begin our next segment on what the options are.
Thanks, Kia. Well, after hearing Mike's bio, it's pretty clear to me why I'm doing the easy bits. So next slide, please, Richard. You'll need to share the slide screen. Thank you. Okay, there's a lot of webinars about on renewables, and many of them focus on putting equipment on your roof. What we've tried to illustrate is that there's more choices than that. So there are choices available to renters, to people who don't have a suitable roof, to people who don't have the funds to pay for their equipment, and that's what we're going to dive into. So there's a lot to go through. Let's get started. Next slide, please, Richard. Okay, let's talk about green power. It's not widely known necessarily what green power is, and I saw in the poll that was the case, that there were not enormous numbers of people understanding it. Electricity generators already have an obligation to provide a certain or meet a certain target of renewable energy in their mandate. What we can do to increase that is buy green power from them. That means they've got to source additional renewables over and above their targets. When they do that, that drives generation upwards, and certainly new jobs in renewables throughout the country, which in our COVID crisis, I think is pretty important. Next slide, please, Richard. So there is, I'm talking too slow for you, Richard. Can we go back a slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so green power isn't the cheapest option available. There is a slight surcharge for it at the moment, although that will decrease over time as renewables gets cheaper. But just because there's a surcharge doesn't mean to say that you can't switch to green power and pay less money than you're doing at the moment. And I'll use the example of a mortgage with a bank. If you haven't chatted to the bank recently, you're probably not on the cutting edge of prices. So what you need to do is shop around, and that's the process that I'll take you through next. Next slide, thanks, Richard. Okay, so if we go shopping, we're actually not shopping for a new energy supplier, we're shopping for a new energy retailer, okay? And all the retailer does is they provide they organise a contract with you which determines the price and the length and so on, and they're responsible for invoicing you and collecting the cash. So you don't have to worry about power disconnections, supply changes or whatever, it's simply the retailer that you're looking at changing. And when you're going through that process, there's some ways that you can achieve lower prices, such as agreeing to pay by direct debit and so on. And we'll take a look at that now. Next slide, please, Richard. Okay, so if you crank up your Google machine and go to a energy comparison site, you'll see something like this. And the retailer wants to know a little bit about your household, how many people there are, what suburb it's in, whether you've got solar on the roof, whether you've got a smart meter and so on. So you give them that information, and if you upload a bill, then they will tailor their results to your circumstances to let you know what the likely savings are. And having done that, we click on that green button at the bottom. Next slide, please, Richard. Okay, so what that will then show you is a list of retailers that have plans that meet those initial criteria. And apologies that this is a bit blurred and hard to read up the top, but what's at the top is a list of filters. So you can say, I'm only interested in fixed price contracts or contracts with no fixed length. I would encourage you not to filter on that, because you could eliminate lower prices for these plans. There is one filter to apply, and that's on where I've got my cursor now. If you can see that, it's the top right, and you can select with this website green power plans. So you'd select that site, apply the filter, and this screen here would refresh, and you'd get the set of plans that match that criteria. Okay, next slide, please, Richard. So those plans will get displayed. I've chosen which ones I wanted to compare, and what it presents me with is a bit more information on each plan. So it will tell me whether it's whether there's credit card fees, whether there's late payment fees, things of that nature. And you can look across this and see for your circumstances which is the retailer that you think you'd best deal with. Next slide, please, Richard. Okay, so this slide is quite illustrative of the fact that if you shop smartly, you can buy green power at quite low prices. Okay, so Randwick Advanced Energy had what they called their classic plan, and for that you'd be paying nearly 24 cents a kilowatt. I've opted for their advanced plan, which means I pay a fortnight in advance, and I'm not earning my 0.5% on the money in my bank account. And in return, they're reducing that price to 22.6 cents, and that comes with 100% renewable power. Okay, so, and this happens time and time again. They've got all sorts of plans, all sorts of tricks to make it a bit difficult to know what's going on. But if you look through into it in a bit of detail, you'll find ways to sharpen the pen. There's also an option, I'll just mention this, people are consuming a lot of power and perhaps they're on a tight budget. Your plan doesn't have to be 100% green power. So in this case, we've shaved it back to 50% green power. That means it's costing me an extra 2.5 cents a kilowatt, which comes to about $8 a month for a 4-person household. And I think that's a small premium to pay to do our bit for saving the planet. So we need to shop around. Next slide, please, Richard. And the other way we can swap we can shop around is by getting some bargaining power. Okay, retailers routinely provide discounts for businesses because they are able to buy large amounts of power. They provide discounts for strata building with embedded networks because they can also group together and buy larger amounts of power. So why not set up our own group of consumers? If we can get many households together, friends, family, people in the strata, neighbours, then what we can do is we can use that bargaining power and we can go to the retailers. And the way this would work is you'd have those people agree in advance what their payment arrangements would be, what the length of the contract would be, and you'd call up the retailer and say, I've got 40 householders. We're consuming $60,000 worth of energy a year, and we'd like to talk about a great deal on green power. Now, I've got to say retailers aren't used to dealing with groups of consumers like that, so they struggle with it a bit. They offer other alternatives more readily, like sign up a friend, you get $75 free, they get $75 off their bill free. So they're used to paying for this, and it's a matter of changing their thinking. The other way this can be done is there's already energy brokers who do this. They mainly, again, do it on behalf of business or on behalf of strata groups, but I've talked to a couple of them, and if we go to them with a group where the work's already done, we've aggregated the households, and we say we've got X number of households, we're using $60,000, $70,000 worth of power, they'll go off to a retailer and they'll tender that out to them. So that's it from me. Getting on to the technical side of things now, I'll hand over to Mike.
Thanks, Steve. So as Kinga mentioned, I did my doctoral thesis looking at putting solar on apartment buildings, but you'll be relieved to hear that I'm not going to give you the whole thesis this evening. So this is quite high level, and I'm just going to go through the other options of how you can access solar, and just the main points about each one. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I'll come back to them later. The first model we wanted to look at was a solar garden, which Kristy's already talked about and will perhaps be better placed to answer questions about later. But the great thing about a solar garden is, like green power, it doesn't need a roof. So if you've got an apartment building like this one, where the roof is heavily shaded or has air conditioning units or lift fittings all over the roof, or the roof is not structurally sound, or perhaps more frequently encountered, people have concerns about that, and people in the building are worried about fitting things to the roof or whatever, then this is a great opportunity, because what it means is you just go and buy part of a solar farm. So it has a lot of similarities with green power in that you're buying solar energy that's not from your building, that's from out of town somewhere and is coming through the distribution network to you. But the difference compared to green power is you can point at where it's coming from. So it's very direct connection to a solar panel or some solar panels in this solar garden. And how it works is you basically invest in that, in the building of the solar garden, so that you own a part of it. And when that energy from that part of the solar garden goes into the distribution network, it's metered, and when it comes into your apartment, it's metered, and you'll get a discount off your electricity bill. So you can do it as an individual, you can do it as a strata body for the common property, or you can all join together and do it, but it doesn't require that. Yeah, so that's the basics. There's a little video which we could play now, which just talks a little bit about the Haystacks solar garden.
What is a solar garden? Australians love solar. Unfortunately, 35% of us are still locked out, unable to get the benefits of rooftop solar because we rent, live in an apartment, have a shady roof, or we just can't afford the upfront cost. The good news is that there is a solution, a solar garden. Solar gardens are the way to make sure everyone can access solar, regardless of the barriers they face. So how does it work? Meet Sally. She's a single mum renting a flat. She loves the idea of solar and could sure do with more affordable and stable electricity bills. A solar garden gives Sally the chance to buy or lease solar panels off-site in a big solar array on a warehouse roof or in a paddock at the edge of town. A retailer takes the electricity generated from Sally's solar panels and provides a credit on her electricity bill. Though the panels are located somewhere else, Sally gets a similar outcome as having solar on her own roof.
Thank you. So I won't say any more about solar gardens, and as I say, we'll come back to questions later. So next slide, please. So in the survey at the beginning of this presentation, I think 96% of you said you were interested in rooftop solar, and I guess it's where everybody goes because that's what Australia is famous for. 2.2 million houses have solar on the roof, so why shouldn't apartment buildings? The advantage this has over a solar garden is that you're not paying for the electricity to get to you through the distribution networks. You're not paying those charges. It's already there. You can get rebates on it, STC rebates, which are the same rebates that people get if they put a solar system on their house. It might be possible to do it without a capital outlay. So one of the barriers for solar can be the capital outlay, and I'll talk a little bit about power purchase agreements in a bit, which is a way of getting somebody else to pay the capital outlay and then just charge you for the energy they use. And putting solar on the roof can be done in a whole load of different ways. You can just put enough on to power your common property. Individual units can do it, or you can put on a big shared system that will power all the different units. So I'm just going to talk through some of those different options. If we could have the next slide. So this is the simplest way to put solar on an apartment building, is to put it on for common property. So it doesn't suit every building. It depends on whether you've got a significant common property electricity demand. So if you've got car parks with fans, if you've got pools, if you've got lifts, it's probably worth doing. If you've only got a couple of lights on a very small building, then it might not be. But it's simple relatively because the roof is a shared resource and is run by the strata body or the owners corporation, and the owners corporation can put the solar on and the owners corporation gets the benefit. So the transactions are much simpler. And basically the solar is put on, feeds straight in behind the meter of the common property load, and effectively reduces the common property bill. So the benefit goes back in reduced strata fees. Very often, when apartment buildings do this, they combine it with energy efficiency upgrades at the same time. And the reason for doing that is because you can reduce your energy load in the common property quite significantly with things like LEDs or more efficient fans and so on. And that overall will make the payback really quick. So you can pay for the whole thing in just a few years. Paying for it, it can come out of your sinking fund, you can borrow, you can put a levy on the strata members, which is generally unpopular, or you can potentially get a power purchase agreement. So that's the idea of a power purchase agreement, is a solar company, solar installer, leases the roof off you, or you give them permission to use the roof. They put the solar on and then they sell you the energy. And so that at a fixed amount for each kilowatt hour of energy. So that way you can avoid the upfront cost. Okay, next slide, please. So I guess the next simplest of these, I'm getting increasingly complex as we go through these, but in some ways increasingly beneficial. So the next one is just to look at putting solar on for individual units. And that can be done. People do it, where basically as a house owner, in the same way as a house owner, an apartment owner puts solar on the roof and feeds it into their own household energy use. And again, they might pay for that up front, or they might get a power purchase agreement. It lowers their household bills. The challenge is that it's not their roof. So the roof is a shared resource, and it requires a bylaw, a strata bylaw, in order to give them individual use of that shared resource. This can be quite challenging, but there are now available template bylaws that will cost you a couple $100, I think. So it becomes less challenging, but there's also you need agreement across the strata body about who can use which bit of the roof. So it's great if everybody's on board and on the same side, but it can be challenging if there's opposition within the building. Next slide, please. Okay, so shared solar. So rather than each apartment having an individual solar system, the other way of doing it is to have a big solar system that is shared between everybody. And there are a couple of ways of doing this. The big advantage of doing this is, so if everybody has their own individual system, if I've got an individual system and I'm out during the day, then that solar energy is just going to go straight out to the energy network, and my retailer might be giving me 10 cents for each kilowatt hour. Meanwhile, my next door neighbour's in with their air conditioning on all day, and they're buying that same energy back from the retailer for $30. Not yet. So overall, the benefit is going to the energy retailer who's getting the cheap energy and selling it back, rather than that benefit staying in the building. If you've got a shared system, then whoever's using the energy within the building will get the benefit of that solar. So 2 ways of doing this. The first is an embedded network. Now, some apartment buildings already have embedded networks. For newer buildings, it can be quite a good way of sharing solar. There are a lot of challenges around it. So an embedded network basically is that there's an extra meter called the parent meter or the gateway meter that's put in between the building and the energy network. And at that meter, the embedded network operator buys energy. They buy it cheaply because they're buying in bulk for the whole building. So they'll use commercial tariffs. And then they sell that energy on to each apartment in the building. And if they put solar on as well, then they're selling that solar to each apartment. So you're getting 2 benefits. You're getting the benefit of the solar and you're getting the benefit of the bulk buying. The challenges in terms of fitting an embedded network to an existing building are quite large. So yeah, as I've said, it's not for the faint-hearted. The regulatory challenges are significant and have got harder. And really, it used to be that a strata body could run an embedded network. It was never easy, but it could be done. Now, you're unlikely to find a strata body doing that with the new regulations, and you're going to need to work with an energy retailer. There are upfront costs as well as putting the solar on. You need to replace all your meters. You need to put in the embedded network infrastructure. So it's challenging. For larger buildings, it can be very beneficial because you're effectively, if you've got a building with 50 apartments in, instead of paying 50 connection charges, you're paying 1. And you're bulk buying that energy at a much cheaper rate. So the benefits are significant. Next slide, please. So this is the other way of sharing solar. And we'll maybe start with the first video and then I'll talk through it in a bit more detail.
Just because you live in an apartment doesn't mean you can't have access to free energy from the sun. We wanted to give everyone the opportunity to see what was possible. And with the help of some key partners at SolarGain, Illume and the City of Moreland, we've been able to prove what can be done. Right here on Lygon Street, we've been able to deliver 12 kilowatts of solar energy that are going to be able to supply electricity not just to the common areas of this building, but to the 2 businesses and 8 private dwellings that are underneath this roof. We're really proud that the people living in this building right here on Lygon Street will be able to access cheap renewable energy, the same as anyone else around the country living in a freestanding home.
Hi, my name is Kerry. I'm a resident here in Brunswick East.
Hey, I'm Sam. I live on Lygon Street in Brunswick East.
I've lived here for about 3 years now. I'm an owner-occupier in this apartment building.
I'm an owner-occupier of an apartment there. I've lived there for about 2 years.
I've been quite interested in getting solar panels for environmental reasons.
Today we're getting some solar put in on the roof and it is very exciting.
I found out about the Australian Energy Foundation project by looking at their website. It sounded quite interesting and I thought it was going to be a really exciting opportunity for Australian Energy Foundation to help our building get solar panels.
People who live in the block were talking about it with me, looking to get off the ground and very excited. Some very nice people came out to our general meeting for our building and just explained what the project was and what the benefits were. There's a few things I'm excited about. Obviously cheaper bills, which is, hey, why wouldn't that be number one? It makes our building kind of stand out. We're one of the few buildings in the area that has solar on the roof. And third, just to be more eco-conscious.
My name is Alex Marks and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Illume Energy. Illume's a startup that was founded in Melbourne 4 years ago. Illume's a provider of the SolShare, and the SolShare allows the solar electricity from this roof to be shared amongst all the apartments in this building. It's a world-first technology that we make in Melbourne.
We'll be helping contribute to getting renewable energy, so for environmental reasons that's really great, but then also for the owners and the residents here are also able to save money long term. It's been really great working with AEF and Illume in this exciting solar panel project. We've been able to get access to this cutting edge technology from Illume so that all the residents in our building can have the solar energy split into the different units so that we can all have access to it. I definitely would recommend getting solar panels to other people and excited that there's the opportunity maybe for other apartment buildings to also get solar panels in the future.
My advice to anyone who's on the edge, maybe considering getting solar, if you don't know if it's possible, I just suggest looking into it because most likely it is. You know, we're in an apartment building and I wouldn't have thought it would be possible here to split the energy between the units, but it turns out I was wrong and it totally is. So it's very exciting. I'd recommend you do the same if you want to look into solar.
The Australian Energy Foundation Energy Advice Centre is right here in Australia, waiting to field your calls to hear about what you can do about putting solar on your apartment building.
So that video was by the Australian Energy Foundation, and that was to do with a trial of this approach that was in Melbourne, but it is available in this part of the country as well. And it's similar to the embedded network arrangement, and it's more complex and it's simpler. And in the end, for strata bodies and apartment owners, it works out a lot simpler. And it's called sharing the solar behind the meter. So with an embedded network, each apartment is buying their solar energy through the same meter that they buy their grid energy from. What happens with this system is you have a separate distribution of the solar. So as you can see in that diagram, each apartment there is buying their energy from their normal retailer, from the grid, And then the Sol share system that Illume are putting in shares the solar from the roof, and that goes separately to each apartment. So it can work a number of ways. It can work with you having two bills. So you keep your original retailer and you're buying energy from them, and then you're buying energy from Illume or from their retailer. Or it can work where everybody changes retailers, and you have you buy your grid energy from the same retailer that is partnering with Illume, so that you get one bill with both sets of energy on it. It's a shared system like the embedded network system, so it can go to all the apartments, but it also doesn't have to go to all the apartments. So if there are particular owners who don't want to be involved, that's fine, and they can opt out. The economics of it and the technical arrangements mean that it works better for some numbers than others. So I think, I can't remember the optimum number for their system. I think it's 8 or 10, I think. And then beyond that, you need another 8 or 10, but you can do numbers in between, but the hardware distributes to that many at a time. So the costs vary depending on how many you've got. But and again, they've got a couple of different business models, Illume, but one of the ones they do is a PPA, where they will pay for the installation, for the solar and for the Sol share, and then they just sell you the energy. So again, no capital outlay necessarily, and relatively simple. You don't need to understand the technical details of what the solar is or find the right installer. That's all managed for you. Just show quickly the second video there, which just gives a little bit clearer explanation of how the energy is shared.
Australia loves solar. More than 2 million Australian households have solar panels and are enjoying saving money on their electricity bills. Yet there's plenty of people missing out. 1 in 10 Australians live in an apartment block, which means they can't install solar. Many small businesses in shopping centres and office buildings can't easily install solar either. Instead of leaving them out of the solar revolution, Illume Energy has invented a technology to let them join in. We call it the Sol share. The Sol share allows all residents and businesses in a single building to share one rooftop solar installation. So whether you leave home in the morning and don't come back until the evening, or stay home to look after the kids, or you're busy running your business 6 days a week, you will receive solar when it will save you the most money. So you too can join the solar revolution. This world-first technology is proudly Australian-made. So we are creating jobs and investment in Australia. Contact us to find out more.
Cool. So that's me done, I think, but very open to questions. I'm not sure if there's any already there in the chat.
Tonight, I want to share with you a vision to bring renewable solar energy into each one of your homes, and to make Arizona an exporter of the same clean solar energy to the rest of the nation. So let's start out by talking about solar. So when I think about solar, a picture kind of like this comes to mind.
Sounds like whoever's played the video needs to stop.
A blue sky, maybe
it's
one.
rolled on to the next one.
There's even sunflower.
Richard, can I just ask you to stop that video now?
Energy and how clean that can be.
Let
me show you another picture.
And before we actually move on to Solar4Strata, I just want to thank Mike for a really informative talk, and Steve
we're in the
as well.
very center of the best solar resource in the country.
I don't know what. Sorry, I do apologise for a little bit of a kerfuffle
Let's put these two things together. We've got clean solar power.
So, Louise, I might hand over to you now.
Yes, great. I've got some questions which I collected from the chat. Richard, can you stop the share now so that we can all see each other? Maybe that would be better. Great. Okay, so first of all, I've got a question. We'll go sort of from first to last to Kristy. Jess is here from the Sydney Alliance. Welcome, Jess. So she says that the upfront cost of buying a share in a solar garden can be quite expensive for the communities she works with, and this is a barrier. Is there work being done to help lower this upfront cost? Is becoming a member a first step to participating? Oh, well, first of all, I'll ask you that, and then are there more subsidies, perhaps, for people who would like to buy in?
Sure, yes. So I'll kind of go roundabout. The first step is to, yes, become a member, because the Haystack Solar Garden is set up as a cooperative ownership structure. And so the membership is $50 joining fee, that's a once-off fee, and then a $1 share to become an owner in the cooperative. And then to actually purchase a solar plot in the solar garden, kind of using terms similar to a community garden to like make the comparison. And so at the moment for the Haystack Solar Garden, we'll be making 3 kilowatt plots available, and so the price for that share is going to be around $4,200, and so it's kind of roughly in the range of what a 3 kilowatt rooftop solar system would be. At the moment, there aren't any subsidies available, and I guess the vision for this whole concept of solar gardens is that for this first project, Australian first, it's never been done before at this scale in Australia, and it's going to be 1 megawatt, so there'll be 333 plots available. But the idea is that once we get this one off the ground, then we'll be doing a lot of lobbying to various government departments so that the rebates that are available for rooftop solar owners, so people who live in houses, can access a quite significant rebate to help them reduce the price. We want that rebate to be available to anybody, regardless of how they're going to make their renewable situation happen, so they can put that towards a solar garden. But yeah, at the moment, there aren't subsidies available for that.
Okay, now Pauline just popped a question in, I think, for you, Kristy. Does this mean you get 3 kilowatts a day per year?
Not exactly. So the 3 kilowatt, that figure is kind of the size of the system that's allocated to each solar gardener. And then the generation that produces is a little bit different. The key thing though with solar gardens is that the power produced in terms of the generation doesn't actually correlate to your electricity bill, well, in a sense. So it doesn't matter how much electricity you use, that's like one part of the bill, and the separate part is the solar garden credit that you'll get. So when the power is generated off-site from the solar garden, that's sold into the grid, and the sale of that electricity is what gets credited onto your electricity bill. So you get kind of a dollar credit, not a kilowatt amount that offsets your bill. Yep.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that explains it to me. Thank you so much. Now I've got some questions for Steve. Maybe, Tracy, this question was answered in the chat for you. It was just asking about the comparative energy site. Is that a government site? And also Jess was asking about this too. How can we as consumers know the report card of these different energy providers? For example, you chose Origin Energy as one of the green providers in your example, but they're also investing in fracking in the Northern Territory. So how can we be sure that we're choosing good providers?
Okay, thanks, Louise. Yes, that was a government site. One reason to use that site is that we hope they're not taking a commission on the way through, as some comparison sites do. That site wouldn't give you the sort of information that you need. And I'll take that question on board, and we'll see if we can find a rating site that allows us to compare.
Well, I think in the chat, and Felix might post it again, Felix has posted a link to a great choice.com site that has some maybe some guidance on that. And Kristy also would like to add to that.
Yeah, so the choice article is really great, but it is using data from 2018. And it's compiled by Greenpeace and the Total Energy Centre, and they're not actually updating it anymore. So it won't take into account, for instance, as someone raised in the chat, that Origin are about to start fracking, and they would have been doing a lot of that in the last 2 years. So that sort of information isn't reflected in the choice article of how they're ranking all of the energy providers. So some of them might have moved around a bit, and I'm sure that there are some of the smaller energy providers that have actually gone up the list above Origin in particular.
Great. We've got, thank you for that. So Felix has reposted that article as well, if you want to have a look. And now one sort of random question. How can renters talk to landlords about putting solar on their strata? Any key messaging that perhaps they should be putting across? Maybe Mike, do you think you can answer that one?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So it's obviously challenging, and the difference in incentives between landlords and tenants is one of the challenges with rental properties. But there's a couple of things. One is that having renewable energy adds to the value of an apartment. So that's got to be for their benefit, and particularly with where the apartment property market is going or has gone over the last year or so. Having a unique feature or an unusual feature such as renewable energy and therefore cheap electricity bills is quite a bonus for selling. And the other is that it doesn't, I guess it's explaining what the options are to them. So it's finding out what options are suitable for your building and then sharing that information with your landlord, because it doesn't necessarily mean they have to fork out the cash up front. And I think that's often the key barrier for landlords, that if it's not a big investment up front, so for instance, if it can be a PPA where the bill payer, the tenant, will be paying for the green electricity, then why wouldn't they do that? Because it gives them a better apartment.
Thanks for that. Now, we've got a couple of questions about solar panels themselves. How do you protect them from hailstorms? Louise from Darlinghurst is asking about that. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
So again, I mean, the hail in Australia can be quite extraordinary, but most solar or most good quality solar panels will survive most hailstorms. So they are incredibly robustly built. They look more delicate than they are. Yeah, so there are cases of solar panels being damaged by hail. But, it's more likely with cheaper panels, and it's not that likely.
Great, that's a relief. I've got solar panels on my roof. Now, Pauline is saying, in large-scale apartments like Walleye Creek, is there any interest from energy providers to mix like AGL community batteries and solar? So is there interest to mix batteries and solar together?
I'm not quite clear of the question. So
yeah, I'm not sure. Pauline
I would,
was asking maybe if energy companies that would put solar on your roof maybe would put batteries. Oh, here we are. Pauline's clarified to provide a whole system to apartment complex. So,
okay. So yeah, so one of the things that's so for a larger apartment building, embedded networks make a lot of sense. And one of the things that's happened around the changes in regulations around embedded networks that makes it harder for strata bodies to run an embedded network is making it easier for the big retailers to come in. So for instance, AGL are taking more of an interest in running embedded networks and potentially putting solar in as well. The thing with a battery is quite complicated. So the benefits of a battery in an apartment building might not stack up at the moment, but there's a lot changing very quickly in that space. So batteries are getting a lot cheaper, and the way batteries can make money in the energy network are diversifying hugely. And I'm going to stop there because it really is a can of worms. But the short answer is there is interest from those sort of companies in putting solar and embedded networks in, and batteries will be coming soon, probably.
And I'll just add briefly to that is often within embedded networks, the individual apartments can't choose the energy provider. It has to be the one electricity retailer for the whole apartment, which can bring lots of benefits, but can also limit down the track. For instance, if folks wanted to join a solar garden that's partnered with a particular retailer, and it's not the same retailer that is with the your embedded network, then that won't be possible. But also just to tap onto that, dealing with your landlord. As a renter, I don't even know who my landlord is because we go through a real estate agent, so it's really hard for us. And that's one of the advantages of solar gardens, that it's actually more of a financial transaction that you do separate to the landlord. And so there's a lot of freedom in how you want to set that up yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. Now there's one more question, and this is from Peter. And he's actually, he said, we put in solar to our strata a few years ago for all the common areas, and 9 out of 32 units on an opt-in basis. The strata management company provided the analysis for the scheme, and they opted for 50% green energy because of costs. It was more expensive than traditional supply, but they opted for 50%. He's wondering if you think that green energy costs will reduce over time. I don't know who would like to answer that one.
I can give that a shot. I would really hope that that does come down because with the uptake of more renewable energy, it's like it is cheaper to produce energy from renewables. So the more renewable energy we have in our kind of broad mix, the cheaper electricity should become, and the less the kind of green power extra costs should be. So, but it'll really, I guess, be partly up to the retailers, partly up to the government, whether they regulate that to reduce as the price of renewable generation at a large scale comes down. So the answer is like, it should, but can't say for sure.
Louise, if I can add to that, all the indications is we're only at the start of the huge decreases in costs of manufacturing and producing these things. So it's no doubt that it's going to fall, and it's going to fall a lot more than people expect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and that we've come to the end of our questions. And thank you so much for your help with all of this and your very clear explaining. Now I'm going to hand back to Kinga to move us on to the next part of our presentation.
Oh, hi everyone. Again, sorry, I've just got to unmute. Okay. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who's spoken so far and for all your questions. Now we've got coming up, and I might get Richard to actually just put that first slide up, Richard, for local councils. We've got Sam Kelley, who is the Sustainability Projects and Reporting Officer for Randwick City Council. Sam's focus to date has been to reduce energy consumption, increase efficiency, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions across council operations first. But he's also seeking to influence opportunities to reduce energy consumption and achieve emissions reductions in residential buildings, schools, and local businesses in his area. So over to you, Sam. We'll let you begin your talk.
Perfect. So I've just joined. Is my mic working okay? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, as you were saying, Kinga, we've had a big focus on council buildings. That's like kind of historically what council's done for the last long time. You know, it's always been easier to reduce council emissions, you know, our own buildings. But we're also aware that on average throughout Australia, the local government areas, the actual council usually represents about 1 to 2% of the LGA's emissions. So we're obviously shifting our focus big time to the community, and we pretty much reflect what's happening around the rest of Australia as well. So obviously, thank you very much for having me here. I have a couple of slides here to just set the scene, so I apologise if this has already been covered. The first one here is just a breakdown of emissions by sector across the eastern suburbs. So I work for Randwick City Council, but I'm talking to a couple of slides here today from Waverley and also Woollahra. So hopefully I don't get too many tricky questions about their programs, but I'm just going to be showing you what they're up to as well. So here's a breakdown of emissions by subsector across the eastern suburbs. As you can see, most of it is occurring from residential buildings and non-residential buildings. And you can pretty much read that as electricity emissions. That's why there's always a large focus on reducing the electricity consumption across the LGA. So if you just want to jump across the next slide, we can go. Thank you very much. Here's just another one to set the scene a bit. This is just showing what we expect the growth to be between 2011 and 2031. This is the 3 councils here. You can see there's almost no difference in increase in detached and detached buildings, but we're expecting multi-units to increase pretty considerably across all the 3 areas. Can you jump across the next slide? Thank you. And this is just the last one to set the scene. This here is just showing rentals. So you can see here the detached and attached are much more commonly owned, but multi-units are rented. So I'm sure some of the previous speakers would have talked about, apartments have a lot of challenges when installing solar or doing, lots of different energy efficiency projects. Having a large percentage of renters in the building can obviously be another challenge, but there's a couple of things you can do to get around that one as well. Okay. Please jump across the next one. Thank you very much. So these next 2 slides are from Waverley Council. I'll speak to them as best as I know. I've worked with both these councils quite a bit on a lot of projects. But if you have any further questions, there's a find more information slide as well. So I think these slides are going to be shared around with everyone. Make sure you check them out and get in touch with Waverley and Woollahra Council as well. Just want to jump across to the next slide for Waverley. Perfect. Someone here just saying so many new units. Yeah. It would be great, Felix. Felix is just saying it would be great if all councils or every new building had solar. I'm not sure if it's been touched on before, but a question we commonly get is why doesn't council just request every new building to have solar? When I first started working for council, it was my first question. If it hasn't come up before, councils basically can't go above the regulations that the New South Wales state government sets. So we can't require something that the New South Wales government isn't also requiring. And it's a bit of a technicality, but it's very frustrating at the local government level. So Waverley Council has 2 dedicated programs which support energy retrofits in Strata. They're both very impressive programs. They've won awards all around Australia. The Building Futures is focused on the larger buildings. Many of these are found in places like Bondi Junction. So that's buildings with more than 40 units. The round 3 is currently open until 30th of June 2021. The focus is entirely on common area energy efficiency and solar. So that's not lot areas. It's all about common area energy consumption, and it involves expert advice and feasibility assessments, costed recommendations. They also get quotes. They also compare the quotes. They give technical advice. They also have a financial incentive. They throw some subsidies in there for some of the installations. And that's just got a question. And they obviously also have like a learning and education part of that as well. Someone's asked, is Bayside offering a similar? It's a good question. Not too sure what Bayside's up to. Randwick, Waverley and Woollahra, we often operate as a bit of a tri-council program. So we do a lot of projects together. Unfortunately, not too across the Bayside stuff. I wish I was. And then the new program, which is brand new, is Solar4Strata. This is focusing on the smaller end of the apartments. So that's less than 40 units. They're currently piloting this with 8 buildings. And this is just focusing on rooftop solar. So this basically involves a similar things to Building Futures. They go out, they do an assessment, they get quotes, they help compare, and it's open until the 30th of June. And this all sounds pretty amazing. So I think on the next slide, we can give you some more information about how to apply. There we go. So if you do want to get in touch with Waverley, you'll be chatting with Nicola there, who's amazing to work with. So visit that website there, sign up for Second Nature, and also watch their Solar for Apartments webinar. I think Mike Roberts might also be in that one. He's a bit of a go-to for the apartment solar space. And then next slide, hopefully I'm not going over time here. So I'm here saying Willoughby Council is paying for our feasibility assessment and to review the proposals. Great. So obviously this is a space that councils are, a lot of us are seeing where we could provide assistance. Strata committees and etc. can be very complex. Council has a great role in basically providing technical support and also just helping kind of compare options that come to strata committees. Just jump across to the next slide for me. Perfect. So Woollahra also has a new offering. It's called the Apartment and Strata Energy Savings. It's a free council initiative to assist strata buildings in reducing energy and water use, potentially resulting in thousands of dollars of savings per year and obviously emission savings as well. Council will work with a select number of buildings to identify opportunities to reduce cost, energy, water, and greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a brand new program as well. And if you could just jump onto the next slide. So here's some reasons to get involved. So buildings are selected to participate. They will receive free energy and water efficiency assessments. They will get detailed reports which clearly identify the financial case for the upgrades. They'll get tailored recommendations for both common area and shared solar PV systems, which I'm sure after the last hour or so of presentations, you guys will be very across the different options. And they also get strata-specific information regarding solar and electric vehicle charging. And also, if you do choose to implement some of the projects, you get that support along the way there. So they'll be there on the day of install as well. So Woollahra is up to lots as well. If you go on to the next slide, I can tell you who to get in touch with there. This next slide for me. Thank you. So yeah, you just want to chat with Jimmy there from Waverley Council. Also really great to work with. So there's his email. Make sure you get in touch with him if you would like to apply for that program. Okay, so now I can probably speak to Randwick Council as the next slide a little bit easier, being my actual council as opposed to just reading off what Waverley and Woollahra sent me the last couple of days. So if you go on to the next 2 slides, I can speak to a little bit more what we're doing here in Randwick. There we go. So we have 2 programs. We have a Solar for Apartments program, which we started about a year ago. We're working with 10 apartments in Randwick to install solar. This includes feasibility checks. We provide bylaws. We get the quotes, we compare the quotes, and we also present at Strata committee presentations. That's actually why I was late to today's meeting. I joined it about 15 minutes ago, just presenting to a Strata committee, which is something we really love to do, get in touch and get to know the community and answer lots of questions. And then the second offering is something I'm really excited to share. This is just launched last Wednesday, if anyone follows our e-news. We've just launched rebates for 10 energy and water saving products. This is brand new, but if you can just jump across to the next slide, I can share to you some learnings for the solar apartments program before I jump onto what we're doing with the rebates. So again, apologies if this has already been touched on today, but these come with some of the themes that have popped up throughout our Solar for Apartments program. I'm sure this has been said, but energy efficiency before solar. Energy efficiency it's often, goes through strata committees quicker. The savings are quicker as well. And also you want to obviously be designing your solar based on your new energy load. So you want to do your lights first and your HVAC, or that's your ventilation in car parks. Often there's huge savings to be found there. We also suggest that you consider other uses for roof space. I just want to make sure that you are, you've considered all options you might want to use your roof for. You obviously also consider alternative sources for renewable energy. I'm sure this has been touched on, green power, the new haystacks model, which is being developed, or is already developed. An interesting finding is that we found that we're seeing prices for installs up to twice that of household. So I'd be interested to hear if that's been the same for the other presenters, but we're roughly seeing about $2,000 a kilowatt. So people are putting 10 kilowatt systems on their common areas and paying up to about $20,000, which is quite a lot more. Smart meter upgrades are obviously a must for solar, but by doing it before you get solar, regardless of if the solar goes ahead, you can get a lot of insights into energy use, and so it's always a benefit. And we also recommend you understand the basics of solar. Sometimes we're chatting with strata committees, and it's like, it's questions that's just about, how does solar work? What is inverters? So you want to make sure you're across all these things when you're chatting with your strata. Quick update, we have 1 out of our 10 apartments installing, 3 out of 10 going to put the resolution to install at the upcoming AGM, and 6 out of 10 were still to be confirmed. So I've just added a couple of links here. You should check out the Intro to Solar and Batteries webinar. It covers just like, the really essentials. And we also did a Solar4Strata webinar, which is, I'm sure like today, covered a lot of great information. Randwick is also partnered with the Australian Energy Foundation. The link's in there for when you get the slides, and you can speak to them if you'd like to request a quote as well. To the next slide for us. Okay, here's our new exciting program that we're really keen to share. These are our new sustainability rebates. So we are basically providing rebates for 10 technologies or initiatives in the community that we really want to push. The amount of rebate kind of varies across the technologies and also varies depending on households and apartments. So I'll definitely jump onto those questions as soon as I get a chance there. People who are just saying them in. So the 10 rebates that we're providing are energy assessments. They're $150. Lighting rebates, we're basically doing $10 a light up to $500. Hot water systems, which is rooftop solar thermal and also heat pumps. If you haven't heard of heat pumps, definitely check them out. And there's a straight up rebate or flat rate of $500 for those installations. Also $500 for insulation. $250 for pool pumps. If your apartment has a pool pump, I really recommend you do a little bit of research on them. If a house has a pool, it's commonly the largest energy consuming device in the house. Pool pumps soak up a lot of energy. Rainwater tanks, basically we're offering up to $1,000 for households, up to $2,000 for apartments. WaterFix is a Sydney water program, which offers free installations of shower heads, and they do a really subsidized cost for like tap replacements and new toilets as well. So we're basically just chipping in there, providing an extra $100. And then a couple here which you might be most interested in, which is our rooftop solar rebate, our solar battery rebate, and our solar health check rebate. Solar health check, just getting someone onto site to check if everything's working okay. So this link here will be in the presentation, but you want to visit Randwick's Community Sustainable website to apply. There's information there about the rebates and the application process. So if we can go on to my last slide, there we go. Provide a little more information about what the rooftop solar rebates are. So I just want to kind of draw your attention to the left rebate here, which is our rooftop solar rebate. And you can see here under the eligibility criteria, there's different prices depending on if you're a house or business, a unit installing in an individual system, or a unit installing on a common area or multiple systems. So just to speak to those units a little bit better, the rebate is $150 per kilowatt if you're an individual system, up to $1,500. For units, the rebate is $200 per kilowatt, up to a maximum of $2,000. So it's pretty considerable. We based that on what we were saying before. We're seeing prices roughly double in the unit space. So we're expecting this will reduce cost by about 10% at the absolute worst case. In some cases, it can reduce it by more than that. So basically, check out the website, apply. We launched it last Wednesday, and we've been inundated with applications, which is really great news for us. We want to get this support out to the community. So definitely check it out. And then just to end, we're also doing a solar battery rebate, and that rebate is $100 per kilowatt hour. Kilowatt hour is just the measurement of capacity in batteries. So a 5 kilowatt hour battery will get $500, and the maximum you can get up to solar batteries is $500. So yeah, really excited to share all those kind of new offerings the council just developed and launched last Wednesday. And I seriously hope we get some more applications in. Again, plenty so far, but we want to keep them coming. So hopefully we get some questions, or might have gone way over my time there, so sorry for that.
No, that's okay. We've got a few questions that have popped up. Are you, the first one was from Mr. Pesky. Are you aware if there are any limitations for company title buildings?
Not that I know of. Maybe one of the other presenters can probably speak to this a little bit better. What do you mean by limitations, like capacity solar-wise, or limitations strata committee-wise? If one of the other presenters knows a little bit more about this one, by all means, feel free to jump in here.
And also, I had a question. When there are all these rebates from different sources, do the solar companies actually, are they on top of those, and will they just tell you about them, or do you have to do the research yourself and tell your provider to organize the rebate?
Yeah, it's a great question. So obviously the rebates are all centrally managed, so they're all through council. So realistically, your installer of whichever device doesn't have to be involved at all. It's a two-stage process. The first stage is just like an eligibility check. So we want you to submit an eligibility form where we basically just check your area. We want to make sure you're in Randwick LGA. And we also want you to attach your preferred quote. And that quote, we just confirm that, everything's gone okay, and that you are actually installing rooftop solar and not some other kind of similar device. And then once we give you that eligibility approval, you're then good to go out, install your solar, and then we just have a proof of purchase stage at the end where you submit an application again. They're really short applications, but you just want to attach, like example, your invoice, your photo of your new system, those kind of things. So basically we just want to prove, first of all, you're in the right area, and then two, prove that you've installed it as per the criteria. So the installers of whichever device don't really have to be involved, but hopefully they push into the community.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. Okay, well, I think I'll pass back to Kinga now.
That talk, Mark, that was great. Mark. So I think now we have another poll. Would that be right? Yes, we've got our final and last poll. So can we have that? Let's take a minute to do that. Erin? Yeah, so we're just trying to gauge which of the solar options that we covered tonight will you investigate further? We'd be interested to know. And we'll share the results like we did last time at the end.
Can I just ask with the polls, when it says solar farms, is that meaning solar gardens? Like, is that I'm going to assume that that's what it means?
I'm going to just hand over to Steve. Steve, can you answer that question?
Yes, that is what it's intended to mean, Kristy.
Yeah, great.
And I might get you, Steve, to interpret the results, okay, when they come up?
I'll do my best.
Good.
I'll just say the reason why, like a community power agency, we try to differentiate between solar farms and solar garden is that large developers build solar farms, and generally it's a development owned sort of thing. While a solar garden does have a solar farm, the idea of it being a solar garden is to kind of make it similar to the idea of a community garden in that it's community owned.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the difference.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so that is a nuance that obviously maybe we didn't quite pick up on, but so Steve, you're saying that the term solar farm here does incorporate a garden as well?
Yeah, we didn't draw that distinction.
Yeah.
And it would have been useful to do that. So
yeah, but it's a good point. Yeah.
I think we can probably close that poll now.
Yep.
And look, it's interesting to see that there is an interest in things outside of just putting rooftop solar. And I mean, my view of it is that rooftop solar might be a great way to go, but gee, there's a lot of impediments and things that slow you up. Just getting Strata agreement and so on is quite a challenge. So some of these other options can be faster. You can get going as an individual or as a renter. So it's good to look across the spectrum, I think. Can we get the slideshow back, please, Richard? Okay, look, I just wanted to close by saying this is an area where I think we can all see it's just evolving, accelerating, and the choices keep changing. It was very heartening to see, all the rebates and so on that are coming out from councils these days. And there's lots of ways for us to move forward. So as I said, we can increase our use of renewables. We don't need a roof to do it. We don't need solar equipment to do it. We don't need funds occasionally to do it, but we do need to take action. And that's what this webinar is all about. So if I can move on to the next slide, please, Richard. And the next slide, yeah. So taking action is not necessarily easy, and we're going to do our best to assist by sending out an action kit, which is really pointed to a lot more in-depth information, putting you in touch with consultants, putting you in touch with suppliers. And if you want to get ongoing email updates, just let us know. And as new things like new solar farms get launched, we can keep you abreast of those things. And now I might hand over to Louise to wrap up. Next slide, please, Richard.
Hi, I'm Louise. I've been doing the questions and helping out with the tech, and I'm really excited about what I've heard tonight. Ordinary people across Australia, like us, have embraced solar power as a cheap and clean energy alternative. And now there's even Australian-made technology to power our homes and share our solar if we live in stratas. So limitless and free renewable energy will power our future, especially in this sunny country. People talk about market disruption and tipping points. We think of it as an explosion of renewable energy. Each time someone signs up for green power, each panel that's fixed to a roof, each square metre of solar array purchased on a solar garden, each factory roof which is turned into a perfect little clean solar power plant is like a stick of dynamite under the old, dirty, coal-powered factories of last century. And the countdown has obviously started. So we're going to share with you to finish a great image of what can happen when we all commit to renewables as we detonate that dynamite and blow up coal forever.